Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this edition of 30 on Thursdays. I'm going to hop into some housekeeping. For those of you joining us for the first time, 30 on Thursdays is a bi-weekly 30-minute webinar series that we've been doing well over 2 years now, where we cover just about anything related to SharePoint. Our next webinar, we're actually going to take a little bit of time off because our next scheduled one would fall right during the SharePointConference.org, which is the conference that we put on. So our next actual scheduled webinar will be on Thursday, June 27th. I'm actually going to present a session that I'm doing at the conference called SharePoint 2013 and Dynamic CRM, A Love Story. You can get the full schedule of our upcoming sessions at suskutech.com/webinars. Today's session is being recorded, so if you need to hop out for a reason, you have to leave early, you can come back to our website probably within the next day. It'll be posted. You can rewatch anything or watch the parts that you missed. And all of our past, or a good portion of our past sessions are available at suskutech.com/archive-webinars. And for today's session, if you have any questions for Zach or myself, please use the question window in GoToWebinar. I'll be acting as the moderator, and we'll typically save those till the end. So we have time to get through all the material in the 30 minutes that we have. Some other online classes that we have coming up if you're interested. We do have Intro to SharePoint 2013 coming up on June 25th. That's a 3-hour format that's going to kind of introduce you to all the new features in SharePoint 2013, kind of from an end-user perspective. We also have some online training for Nintex Workflow that's coming up in July on the 24th and 25th, and you can get all the information on these classes as well as other web-based classes like this on our website, suskutech.com/online-classes. And we have a bunch of recordings available of all those classes we've done in the past. You can check them out. We cover everything from responsive web design to jQuery to advanced InfoPath. We just did one yesterday on PowerShell. So those are all available, pretty inexpensive, 3 hours in length. You can learn about some pretty cool topics related to SharePoint. And as I mentioned, I think both Zach and I are presenting at the SharePointConference.org, which is coming up 2 weeks from today. It's at the Gaylord National Harbor in Maryland, right outside of D.C. If anybody on the phone wants to attend, feel free to use the coupon code on the screen there, 30T15. You'll save 15% off. A lot of great sessions. I'm doing a couple. Like I said, Zach's doing one. You can get all the information at SharePointConference.org. So without further ado, let's jump into today's session, which is a really interesting session on automating and tracking accounts payable processes in SharePoint 2010. Our presenter today is Zach Fiorelli from Bottom Line Technologies. I'm Steve Witt, Director of Training here at Protiviti. I will be the moderator, and I'll actually be setting up the demo and walkthrough that Zach's going to be doing here in a second. So the business scenario, they'll kind of lay it out here on why I'm particularly interested in this topic is we find out that a lot of organizations that are using SharePoint as an enterprise content management system, they're using it to store their documents, they're using it for the security features, they're using it for metadata, they're using it for search, and they're using all of those great features that we know SharePoint has, and why we've all bought into the platform because of those features. Of course, the collaboration aspect of it being that as a part of it as well. But then most of the organizations also have some sort of ERP repository for enterprise data. This is where it's managing more of the business side of things, and Microsoft has accompanying and sister technologies that handle things like accounting and payables and vendor setup and things like that. And what we found is that these things aren't often well integrated, or they're really two disparate systems with a user base that prefers to use one system over the other, which provides some challenges because you want to use your SharePoint as your ECM to store all of your documents, regardless if they're accounting documents or HR documents or project documents or things like that. You want them all stored in one system so you can leverage the search, you can leverage the metadata, you can leverage the security and things like that. So that kind of gets into that, the business challenge, right, is the predominantly accounts payable is a paper-based, or still today is predominantly paper-based. I know a lot of organizations are going to, electronic invoices and things like that, but by and large, it's a paper-based process. And then the integration of that ERP, whatever ERP or backend system you're using in SharePoint, doesn't really have a native integration, right? You can do swivel chair, which is essentially, what's in the ERP is in the ERP, and then you have to do a second batch or manual batch of entry into SharePoint. If you want to store your actual invoices in SharePoint, you would do it that way. And then you also have the option of doing custom code. So if you want a more robust integration between the two systems, you can. You can write something that is going to integrate with the ERP and is also going to integrate with SharePoint, but that can get costly, and we all know that ERP systems tend to change from version to version, and when they release a new version, you're obviously in there going and updating code and doing fixes and things like that. And then lastly, you have the idea of adding, using third-party products. So this is the kind of the build versus buy thing. So there's an option there. That's part of what we're going to look at today, is being able to automate all of this using SharePoint, leveraging your existing ERP, but doing it without a lot of need for custom code, using a couple of different technologies. And the thing is, and again, the business challenge is that you'll find that what we find is a lot of organizations, the accounting function spends all of their time in the ERP, and in their screens that they need to use, and are not spending as much time in SharePoint as maybe that people that use it for collaboration and other things may. So how can we leverage what people do on a daily basis, their actual work tasks, and how do we get them to leverage the power of SharePoint and do it in a way that doesn't interrupt kind of the way that they're working? So why should you care about this, and why do we find a lot of organizations are kind of going in this direction as a viable option of how they can leverage SharePoint, and why would they want to leverage SharePoint this way and automate this accounts payable process? Well, of course, there's the idea of it reduces the overall accounts payable processing costs. It shortens the invoice to pay life cycle, because again, you're automating this. Increased visibility, it's auditable. And really one of the things that we found is it helps to drive adoption of SharePoint and using it as that full enterprise content management system. So there's a lot of value that an organization can get from automating it, not only automating it, but automating it and having it leverage SharePoint. So what I thought I'd have, and I'm going to turn it over to Zach here in a second, is have Zach walk us through the solution that they have, where it kind of does exactly that. We're going to kind of look at the system from paper scan all the way through, and see how some of the functionality that they have that resides in SharePoint helps to tie these things together and make for a pretty compelling story here. So I think without further ado, Zach, we're going to jump in and take a look at it.
Okay.
So I'm going to go ahead and make you the presenter.
All right, thank you. I'll start sharing my desktop here. I love that swivel chair. That's my new favorite business descriptor. I can really picture someone working in one system and then swiveling their chair over the other monitor to work in the other system. That's great. All right, everyone, do you see my desktop, Steve?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, perfect. All right, everyone, so like Steve said, I'm going to walk you through kind of processing an invoice, a day in the life of processing an invoice, and we're going to do it within our Transform AP solution here, which is mainly SharePoint based. The only piece that really is not, the experience is not inside SharePoint is going to be the first step, and that is the capture of the document. So let's get started and kind of walk a day in the life. And I'm going to start off in what we call our Transform Active Capture solution. So like Steve mentioned, today in AP predominantly is still a paper-based world. So you have to be able to get these documents into an electronic content management repository like SharePoint. The first step of that is to actually capture these documents. So I am not driving a scanner right now, but I could be. I'm obviously in a virtual machine. But if this was a actual scanner, when I hit the scan button, it would just be bringing that paper in through my scanner. But since I'm electronic, and this is the benefit, it does not matter if you're electronic or paper. You can bring these documents in either way. So I'm going to browse out and select these three documents, and this is what I'm going to work through my workflow today. So let's get the document into the system. Let's get rid of the paper, even if it's electronic or paper, it doesn't matter. Let's get it into a true capture solution where we can actually OCR these documents and now start getting some of the data, manual data entry reduction that you see when you actually do capture. So here I have invoice 1, and you can see my 3 invoices down in this view. What I'm allowed to do here is actually separate these invoices electronically if I needed to. So I can say this is a 1-page or a 3-page invoice. Or with one mouse click, I could just simply say how many pages are in this expected batch of invoices, and then go ahead and update these, and it'll separate them all. The last thing we want you to do is print out electronic documents in order to separate them. That would be goofy. So you can separate very easily, and then you can move this on to OCR. So while this is working, I want to kind of briefly talk about the workflow you're going to see today. So what I have set up and what our standard kind of invoice processing workflow is 3 steps. First step is to code and assign this invoice for approval. Second step is approval, and that approval will actually kind of walk a chain, and you'll see how we define that chain and that hierarchy inside SharePoint. And then third step is what we call accounts payable quality control. And that just simply is you checking as accounts payable professionals that the expense coding is correct. So that's a 3-step workflow. That's what I'm going to walk through today. I'm going to play all those roles. I'm going to take you through this day in the life of processing an invoice. So here you can see that what has happened is the data that is on these invoices has been automatically extracted. This is what we refer to as intelligent OCR. And for these invoices you see here, the active capture solution has actually learned these vendors' invoices and has created what we call a vendor fingerprint. So every vendor has a unique look to their invoices, and usually that is in the upper kind of third area of that invoice. What we're able to do is remember areas that specify where things like invoice date are, where things like invoice number are, and then highlight fields that maybe have a low confidence. So the theory here is you're scanning batches of invoices, probably 20 at a time. You don't need to stop and look at every invoice. You can go ahead and just look at the ones that might have exceptions. And the name of the game is really about reducing data entry. This is trying to make your life a little bit easier when it comes to getting data off of the paper and getting it into an electronic format. So I'm just going to skip through these first 2 and correct here what you see as my yellow areas at low confidence. And what I want to show you is what does it look like when we see an invoice for the first time. So I talked about how we learn these invoices. So what happens is, as part of just processing the invoice, part of just doing your day-to-day job, we actually teach the software where things are for these vendors' invoices the first time it sees it. So for this vendor, this might be the first time. All I do is highlight the areas that show things like the vendor name, the vendor address, and really what I'm doing is I'm actually building out, as I'm going along here, I'm building out my fingerprint so that the next time this invoice comes in, it will look like those ones you saw me do earlier where all the data was already there. But you can see I'm not typing any of this in. I'm actually just roping and extracting, because what has happened here is we have done full text OCR on this image so that all the text that is extractable is going to be pulled off automatically, and we can reduce data entry. That's really what you're looking to do here, and become electronic. This is the first entry point in dealing with the paper. So there you go. As part of just processing this invoice, I didn't have to do anything out of the ordinary. I didn't have to call an admin and have them set up a template for this vendor. It learned it on the fly. That's what we call vendor fingerprinting. So once I'm done, I've done all my invoices, I've extracted my data. All I need to do is then hit this button, and what's going to happen is it's going to take image, it's going to take the data, and it's going to now send that into SharePoint. So the capture solution obviously was just done inside that application. Now we want to start talking about living inside the SharePoint world, and this is where, like Steve was mentioning, we really see the business value. Once we get these documents in the SharePoint, we get this metadata in the SharePoint, now you have all the potential of SharePoint. You can do the searches, you can do to get the visibility into where things are at. And just to summarize what Transform AP is inside SharePoint, if I had to boil it down to 2 main components, it's basically an invoice library where these invoices are being sent and the metadata is being stored, and it's a workflow task list where workflows are being generated. So as invoices are coming in, and here you can kind of see a view of what we call our kind of scan today. These are some invoices I've scanned in, and my other ones are coming in as we speak. But what happens is invoices are coming in, metadata is here. So now instead of the paper sitting on desk, I actually have visibility into things like my amounts, my spend maybe across companies. It really kind of opens up or it gets rid of that paper shuffling, gets rid of that mystery about what do you have sitting out there. What do you have sitting out there on people's desk? So that's kind of the first part of the battle, right? Get it in the SharePoint. Get it in here, get it visible, store it in the SharePoint document library. And what you see here is just the SharePoint document library. We're not really customizing or making SharePoint proprietary where you can't configure things within here. So we really believe on fully utilizing the Microsoft stack and fully utilizing SharePoint so that you can do configurations inside here. You can extend this in ways that you can do with just kind of standard SharePoint functionality. We really believe in getting the most out of your kind of SharePoint investment. So you can see the workflows firing off here on the side of some of these documents that are in here. And then let me show you the workflow task. This is kind of what tasks look like. So I want to kind of close the loop, show you where the documents go after they're scanned, but let's continue to play that kind of day in the life, and let's actually work this as if you are one of those people in those 3 steps of my workflow that I spoke about earlier. So first step is process the invoice, code it, expense it, classify it, and then get it into approval. So here I am on an AP processor landing page. This is just the SharePoint dashboard with SharePoint web parts we've configured as part of our product. And here you can see, as an AP processor, I have some tasks to work at the top of my queue here. And the first task I want to open is this one. And I want to talk about some of the kind of efficiency gains you can get. So what you see here is basically a SharePoint workflow task form that we have developed, and it is optimized to process invoices. So data on the left-hand side, invoice on the right. I can open this invoice in a new window if I needed to. Usually this is a 2-monitor scenario people are working out of. But I can do things like add supporting documents, and you also see the data that was extracted during capture time. So an optimized form, one that's built specifically to handle invoice processing, but has the ability to be configured to add new things like text boxes and drop-downs and dates. This form is very configurable because not everyone's business requirement is these exact 6 fields right here you see on the form. So our whole goal when we developed this product inside SharePoint was to make it so you don't have to always develop. You don't need development type skills to configure this, to use it, to expand it within your organization. So this form is configurable. You can add things like text boxes and drop-downs, but the other important thing to note here is now I am actually reaching out and integrating into my ERP. So this lookup you see here is a live lookup into the ERP. It's actually pulling back vendor information as I'm typing it in. So I'm able to make sure that my data that I'm entering in that is required for me to submit this document in the ERP is valid. There's validations going on. Things like defaulting terms, defaulting currency. You can also notice here how I already have coding applied to this vendor. The reason why I already have coding applied is because we allow you to have coding-based templates for vendors. So a little bit of efficiency gains when you're trying to code these expenses and these invoices that are the same month after month. So let me go ahead and submit this one through, and then I want to work one of my tasks and show you, work it through approval so I can give you a glimpse into what that approval process looks like. Because now there's a workflow behind this. So all of these tasks that I'm completing here, they're actually being completed with a workflow behind them. And we're using the SharePoint workflow engine to run these. This is not a proprietary workflow engine that we've built. This is all the standard SharePoint workflow engine that's running these workflows you see here. All right, so let me go ahead and grab my other task here that I wanted to work and show you the approval process. This is my second invoice that I scanned in. And this invoice, I'm going to go ahead and actually code it and just show you some of the coding highlights. So for this invoice, I actually have what I call a user-based template that I saved off so that I can reuse. It's similar to like an expense, right? You want to remember the last way you coded an invoice so that you can reuse it and save some time. Well, that's exactly what I'm doing here. I've just gone ahead and loaded this coding because I already maybe coded this invoice last month, and I have my expense categories already broken out. I'm going to go ahead and just code my tax in there. If I had not had this coding, I need to adjust my coding. This is another point where we do have integration into ERP. So here what you see is me actually reading out into the ERP and pulling back the valid account strings, again, so that you don't have to deal with that duplicate or that double data entry, and you don't have to deal with bad data coming back within SharePoint here. If people are hand typing this in, or if they're writing it on invoices, this is all the stuff that we kind of can eliminate. So I'm going to go ahead and submit this through. What I want you to just take note of here is my marketing path. So this is a marketing invoice for $571. I'm going to go ahead and submit it and move it through. And I just want to show you kind of how this is going to get routed. So to continue with that SharePoint theme and utilizing SharePoint, this is where our approval hierarchy is stored. So you saw that path drop down on that form. I'm actually looking at this SharePoint list right here, and I'm determining who to route it to and for what amount I need to get authority for. So a $571 invoice, That's going to go to myself first, and then it's going to go up to Blaine. So I'm going to walk up this authority chain. And you can manage this list and add to this list and add departments to this list. This is all just SharePoint-based list, so it's very easy to configure and kind of take over. So I submit that for approval, and for approval, I want to show you a kind of a different way, a different world of maybe looking at things. Maybe approvers are more email-based in an email world. So here I am inside my email client, and this could be a mobile device, by the way. Obviously, I'm opening this up on my desktop, but this could very well be a mobile device. We're able to put all the details of the invoice inside the email, as well as the invoice itself, and then let you actually just reply right here. So if I'm okay with this invoice and I type it correctly, I can go ahead and approve it right here from my device just by typing in a keyword and hitting reply. Maybe familiar workflow functionality that you might have seen inside SharePoint. We take advantage of that same functionality. So I can just approve, reply to this email, and that will actually signify my approval. If I happen to be online and I am on my network, I can get to my SharePoint site, I can also approve this way through my form. And then I can always add comments along the way. All right, so I'm going to approve this one. I'm going to move to my next step. And then I want to kind of get into some of the other highlights of this because I don't want to keep working this through the workflow the way. I think you'll start to get the idea. Basically, it's that three-step workflow that I spoke of: processing, approving, and then getting it through a quality control. So let me just sign in as Blaine just to show you where that went. Type in Blaine's password correctly. Okay. So now I'm signed in as Blaine. You can see here I have now a new approval task in my task list. So very much driven out of SharePoint task list, very much driven out of the SharePoint workflow task list that you may be familiar with seeing inside SharePoint, just that we have added the value of this kind of invoice-specific form as well as the integration to the ERP so that you don't have to worry about developing that piece. So here you can see it approval. Just to show some highlight here on the form to talk about that configuration. This is read-only up here now at approval. I can choose to make fields read-only or not. Like I don't want my approvers changing my path once it's been sent on its way. I can see my comments here, and I can go ahead and adjust coding if I need to. But here you can see different buttons too, right? I have approve and reject now. Instead of back on that first step, I had that kind of submit. So I'm going to approve this, and that's going to kind of end the flow of the workflow. I want to give you a kind of a sense of what our task forms look like, what things look like as they're flowing through the system. With that flowing through, what ultimately happens is when you submit that last step, so when I'm at my last QC step and I submit my last task, what happens is we then go ahead and we put this invoice into the ERP. In this example, I'm just showing Dynamics AX, but really we work with many different ERPs. Since our connection, our integration is mainly inside SharePoint, and then we have a component that sits between SharePoint and the ERP to facilitate that connection. But this is an example of AX that I'm in right now. And I want to just show you, if you're in your ERP system, you can still get back to these invoices because they are stored in SharePoint. And I can get back to them very easily by just clicking links in the ERP or performing searches. But we do that directly from the ERP because we know about the location of this document. We know the URL right back to this invoice. So here I'm able to do a search. Here I'm able to do a filtered search where I'm querying for this invoice. But just because it's in SharePoint doesn't mean it's hard to get back to when you're in your ERP system. Lastly, I just want to show a quick view of a report. Since this data is now electronic, you obviously have the advantage of reporting. This is SQL Server reporting services, again using the Microsoft technology stack. You have visibility into approval productivity time. You have visibility into invoice counts per month. You have a lot of these metrics that you can track, as well as searching, like Steve mentioned earlier. I can go ahead and I can search as well. So here I am inside my SharePoint library. I want to filter. I want to find all my payments for Jack Nadel, and I get instant information about where things are at. So that's a quick walkthrough. That's a high level showing the workflow, the steps, that last kind of integration into the ERP, and then how you get back to the documents. But with that, with that, Steve, I will turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks, Zach. And I have a couple of questions, and I wanted to actually clarify. I was thinking as you were going through this, when you talked about the workflow component, there is, what you showed, particularly with the lazy approval responding by email, that's actually using kind of Nintex under the hood, right?
That is correct. So we embed Nintex Workflow Designer in our solution so that you can use a very familiar workflow tool in the SharePoint environment to maintain and configure and extend these workflows.
Right. Yeah, and that was actually one of the questions somebody once wanted to say, hey, look, that looks a lot like Nintex, and it actually is Nintex under the hood. Yep. The other question that we have a couple questions, is what tool did you use for the OCR conversion of PDF from the scanner?
The tool, actually the capture engine is Abby. It's a well-known capture engine. The tool is our Transform Active Capture application, which we sell, that can take in a PDF document and OCR it, and then output a PDF that has a OCR layer on it.
Okay, great. So next question is, will the invoices not appear in Great Plains until the approval process is 100% complete?
That is a true statement, yes. They will not appear until the approval process is complete. We do have accrual reports that I didn't show, given the kind of limited timeline here, but we absolutely record accrual information inside our system so you know what is in our system and not in your Great Plains ERP yet.
Okay, great. Next question, does it integrate with Office 365 and SharePoint Online?
So with SharePoint Online, if it's a private SharePoint instance, then yes, we can integrate with it. Office 365, as it stands today, we do not integrate this product with it, but going forward, Office 365 is going to start becoming more friendly for third-party apps, and we'll look to take advantage of that.
Yeah, and along those lines is we looked at solution today in SharePoint 2010. You guys have a 2013 solution?
So 2013 is coming very shortly. It's actually scheduled for release next week. We will have a 2013 compatible version, so we're looking forward to that.
Okay, great. Next question, how does this integrate with PeopleSoft Accounts Payable?
So the integration is really independent, per se, of any specific ERP. The way it works is we are able to integrate via database tables or export data via XML or database tables. So the integration can be generic or it can be very tight. We have specific tight integration with targeted ERPs. With PeopleSoft, we would have more of a table and XML output type integration.
Okay, same question for SAP.
So SAP would be done in the same manner. It would be a connector between SAP and SharePoint, and that would be done through kind of database table migrations and also XML file outputs.
Gotcha. Next question. This goes back to that last search you did when you did a search for Jack. How did you get the search fields on the top of that to search by vendor? And is that a proprietary web part or unique web part you guys have developed, or how did you actually set up that search?
Yep. Yeah, good question. That's a common SharePoint request. So that is a web part that we have inside our solution. It's a web part that we package up. It allows you to filter on SharePoint list, but that is exactly what it was. It was a web part on top of a list and lets you filter down.
Okay. And then there's actually one question, and I think this is actually a good point. Zach, if you want to talk briefly, because we did mention Nintex, we of course mentioned Bottom Line, but this is all packaged in as one turnkey solution that you guys, Bottom Line Technologies, offer. But can you give maybe a breakdown of the hierarchy or the different components at play here?
Sure. Yeah, definitely. So first component you saw was the capture component, right? That's important. That's getting documents into SharePoint, OCR, reduced data entry. So that's one main component of our solution. Second component is what we call our SharePoint application, which is inside a SharePoint site. So when you deploy our solution, it is a SharePoint deployment. It installs the site, installs all the libraries, installs all the lists, installs the Nintex workflow component that you saw, as well as installs the connector to the ERP. So the forms, we have a non-PO and PO invoice processing workflow templated out of the box. So we take that workflow, we configure it, give you basically what we consider kind of a best practice starting point for processing invoices, and then you're more than welcome to kind of take ownership over on that workflow and enhance it. But it's capture, it's SharePoint, site, and application with those forms you saw, and then it's ERP integration to boil it down to 3 main components.
Okay, great. And I'm getting a couple of questions here about people who maybe joined late and want to see the whole thing. This has been recorded and will be available probably within, if not by the end of the day, by first thing tomorrow morning on our website. You can watch it in its entirety. And I have one last question here, Zach, and then we'll wrap it up. It's a pretty specific question. Currently, our accounts payable department has to code the invoices in PeopleSoft, and then they go through a workflow process. Trying to understand how this SharePoint process would be different, other than the
so what we so what we like to do is kind of get away from what we like to do is bring that coding experience into the SharePoint world, so that maybe it's not accounts payable that has to do all the coding. Maybe your invoice owners can do the coding, or some of it, or pieces of it. But what we look to do is bring that necessary coding for the non-PO invoices. I showed mainly non-PO today. We handle PO as well. That's important to note. So we kind of looked at bring that coding experience to more distributed manner, and then make it a little bit easier to do and do it inside SharePoint, a more familiar environment. But it would happen inside SharePoint.
Gotcha, because the people that maybe would be coding it wouldn't have access to the ERP, but they have access to SharePoint, and they have access to participate in the workflow, so they can provide input into the coding.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Okay, and I think that was our last question. Zach, I'd like to thank you for your time. This has been great. Like I said, when I first saw this, I was really impressed with how kind of everything kind of pulls it all together, and you really leverage SharePoint for what it's really good at. So if anybody has questions, Zach, I'm going to go ahead and take control back from you real quick. Let me make sure I can do that. And if anybody has any questions, there's Zach's contact information. My information's up there as well. We'd be happy to answer any additional questions you have. Again, thanks Zach for his time this afternoon. That will conclude today's 30 on Thursday. Again, we're taking the next scheduled Thursday off, which will be right in the middle of our SharePointConference.org. Hope to see everybody there. And we'll be up again on June 27th, where I'll be talking about CRM and SharePoint and Yammer and all the good things coming in SharePoint 2013. Talk to you soon.